You are watching.
Welcome back to Technology, AI and Cyber Live. What we've got now is a discussion panel on the future of cybersecurity. Now, you could argue that if someone could predict the future of cybersecurity, there'd be no need for it, but that's exactly what we're about to sit down and talk about and hopefully glean some insights. So joined by two key players in the cybersecurity industry, and we are very excited to have them both here. The first is Simon Chassar, who you've just met. He was just speaking. Simon is the CRO of Clarity. Simon. And also Richard Jones, who's the head of information security at, I've said that wrong, haven't I? No, I have. Head of information security cyber at Leidos. Now, I'm double pleased to see Richard here because we couldn't have done this event today without Leidos. They've supported us from the beginning, so thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Would you like to give us kind of an overview for anyone who isn't sure of what Leidos actually do?
Leidos is a large American company, and you can look us up on the web, please do. In the UK, we're a smaller footprint, but we work very closely with our American partners to provide key services to government. We work across the government sectors and also with the MOD. We tend to focus on niche requirements in the UK and support various one-off projects rather than large scale. We'll look at specific solutions helping government customers move to cloud or in some way evolve their IT services. We do a wrap around the technology and IT service management, so we provide a capability to enhance and optimise the way government departments interact with their customers, usually the public, in order to make them more efficient, make them more effective for public service.
Thank you. Well, again, incredibly excited to have you here, so thank you. For making the trip. And Simon?
Yes, so I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Clarity, as you said. Clarity is a cybersecurity software company that's primarily focused around industrial cybersecurity and everything from sort of IoT and IIoT to OT. We, in our sectors, focus really on critical infrastructure accounts and customers, all the way through to automotive, food and beverage, water utilities, multiple utilities actually, chemical, mining, and therefore we are really providing this technology on a sort of global basis. So we are headquartered out of New York. I'm based in the UK, but I have my general managers in multiple regions, Europe, Americas and Singapore. We have multiple offices, and I run and I'm responsible for the solution engineers team, the sales team, the inside sales team, channel partners, alliances, and field marketing. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So we're here today to discuss the future of cybersecurity, which actually is a borderline impossible topic. But if we start with the kind of recent history of cybersecurity, and I know that every conversation everyone has refers back to COVID, and sadly this one's about to, but presumably your industry and the landscape completely changed because businesses, certainly large corporates, were going from securing a site and securing equipment that they knew and that they owned and that they could control, and now everyone pretty much is working from home. We're back in the office 3 days a week at BizClick Media, but the vast majority of people are working at home. So that introduces a whole new field of risks. Devices you don't know, networks you don't know, could even be unsecured coffee shop networks. On top of that, is it just harder to actually engage with employees on cybersecurity threats as well? How much has that changed the outlook on the industry?
I mean, if you wanted me to say first, because I sort of lived it in my previous role as the Chief Revenue Officer of NTT's cybersecurity business, which is primarily a services focused business. You know, the challenge we had was actually customers moving through the COVID pandemic effectively had to just shift over employees to work from home. In some cases, they didn't have their own physical corporate devices, so they had to use their own devices. Therefore, making sure that they had the same malware, email security, VPN access protections on those endpoints was the first sort of shift that companies went through to sort of get them just connected. And then it was a case of, okay, now this is going to become a longer term thing. How do we then respond to it? Which was, okay, the perimeter is no longer the building that they all used to work in. So I had maybe, you know, one firewall to 50 employees. I now need to think about 50 firewalls in 50 different locations. So then there was a complete re-architecture of how they did network security, cloud security. Obviously, using cloud and provision environments because of the remote nature meant that had to move to really a secure access service edge, which was in the industry SASE, and really securely connecting every single device and making sure that that's trusted. And that was one of the big shifts I saw initially in COVID.
For ourselves, we as a company had already got a posture where we were equipped to work remotely, so our endpoints are secured and trusted, and sometimes we can take them into the office and find a docking station that's compatible, but VPN and endpoint security is the answer to the first question there. However, for our customers, they didn't all have that same benefit, and so the sorts of issues that Simon's mentioned were true for a lot of the customers we support. So issues that we've seen which are a concern for security is the ease in which people can refresh passwords over a network that's not really intended to support that. And so, yes, it has been a challenge, but broadly for most of our customers, fortunately, it's been straightforward. So, and for our organisation, our bigger concern is actually about the availability of our staff in the longer term, because this is something that we hope we can recover from pretty quickly and get people back to a normal working pattern.
Yeah, so the key word for me was people. From what you've just said, cybersecurity in the name is high tech, but actually it is really about people, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, I please educate me. I would imagine that the majority of successful attacks have come in with some human element. No?
I mean, I think what you've seen, just going back to COVID, because I think it leads to the discussion around where the future's going. But I mean, what we've seen is that malactors was using COVID as a way to entice people to click on phishing links, for example. And because people were, maybe they were the invoice processor, for example, that sat in the office, had never had any exposure to sort of, those phishing campaigns and what they meant. And therefore, everyone that then started to work remotely had to increase their knowledge around the cyber awareness, increase their own capabilities, because you have to drive out education, because they were clicking on the link that effectively was saying, oh, read the corporate's new COVID policy, that effectively was driving malware into the environment. And because we'd opened up the doors for this remote working, it was creating these back doors. And therefore, I think increasing our own awareness and knowledge around security, little things like padlocking the corners, changing the passwords, refreshing it, all of that has gone on, I think, through COVID. So skills awareness has gone up. And I think that's a continued theme that we've got to think through for the future, is how do we increase our skills within the community? I don't know about...
Absolutely, it is the people. The cyber attacks are launched by people with a particular mindset, and then the rest of the world, thankfully the majority, are they're trying to do a normal job, and get on with their lives. So we are keen to support it being easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. So training, key point Simon's made, that we as an organisation support our customers improving their training regimes, testing, spear phishing campaigns, run against ourselves just to make sure that we keep ourselves sharp, and that's provided some very salutary lessons for us, I'm afraid to say, but the point is everybody can find themselves in a rushed moment between calls, oh yeah, right, bang, Yeah. So, those are key things, and obviously perimeter defences and smart email assessment is a way to go on some of that, but email, and as Simon said, that whole, oh look, here's another COVID thing, I better read about it, it was a bit of a challenge.
So I guess this is how we lurch towards the future, but is training enough? So every job I've ever had has had some sort of cybersecurity training. From, I used to work at the BBC, and it's like a game, so you have to play a game, and that game is in theory teaching about cybersecurity, through to sitting watching some relatively boring videos. But I mean, I still get caught. I got caught out relatively recently. So our CEO, Glenn White, sent me an email, or did he, telling me that we needed some more credit on one of our ad accounts. So someone had obviously seen this business user, I'm not going to name the service because it wouldn't be fair, but this business uses this service. The CEO might feasibly email the marketing director and say there's a problem with it, and there was a link, and I clicked the link, and it was only that the website wasn't quite right, that I didn't type in our password. If I typed in our password, and I don't know what they could have done, but it wouldn't have been pleasant. They didn't do that because they fancied it. So is human training actually enough, and what can cybersecurity experts like yourselves do to try and minimize that human element?
I would say you're spot on. What we've seen is that sort of intelligence-led targeted attacks, looking at people's jobs and where they operate. So if you are the data administrator, using a way in which they target those what they call spear phishing campaigns for those on a job level, now it's become prevalent, which has then created an innovation in technology to from the email security perspective to look at that in a different way as a threat vector of how we then create an alert. And the challenge that you get is with more and more security controls, you increase the volume of noise through all the false positives, where it's becoming difficult for organizations to actually filter through the false positive to find the right alerts they should focus on. But it's created a sort of an innovation in some of these technologies to target them and to identify them. But it can't rely on training alone, but we can't rely on just technology alone. It's one of those things which have to go hand in hand. You've got to increase the skills and awareness, increase the processes, and effectively increase the tools. But I mean, ultimately build the tools in from the ground level. So that's secure by design, which is, making sure we build what service we are building for our employees and for our customers with a security mindset. How does that get born? And then how is that going to run? And thinking through the whole life cycle. I mean,
absolutely. So secure by design. I've written that phrase several times in proposals, and it is all about thinking through the business process. The end to end. Is there going to be an interaction that requires an email, and how are you going to inculcate a sense of trust around that? A lot of people will be rightly suspicious of emails, and if that's the vital link that's going to make this service work, you have to make sure that comes across properly for the clients. So, and then there's the opportunity to say, well, actually, maybe we can move away from email now. Maybe there's another option. And so you have to keep your mind open to changing some of your process steps if that's going to enhance your security overall. But remember, I said it should be easy for people to do the right thing. So you don't want to make life hard and then people start looking for shortcuts, because that could take you completely down the wrong path. So it would be far better to make it easier.
Richard, would I just say, because I remember we were speaking earlier, I mean, ultimately that leads to trust no one.
Yeah.
Right. So in terms of the zero trust.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's where I think also, there's another future direction, right? In a way, really hardening down on zero trust no one until their identity could really be validated, and that multiple factor and so on that goes on with it.
Are we being too obvious by emphasizing the human factor so much? Has technology and the kinds of attacks that are being made moved on to the point that actually it's almost easier to not go in a human way and to attack a system in another way? Is there another way into a system, and do businesses need to be worried about it?
Well, I mean, AI is, the amount of bots now and the AI, it's machine on machine from a reconnaissance and sort of, penetration testing approach, which is why, you run breach simulation attacks using technology, and you run your own technology to defend against technology which is doing that initial reconnaissance. But, that still gets to a point where technology leaves and the process and the people that sit behind it have to fill some of those extra gaps, so that it's machines on machines to a certain point, but once they identify somewhere, there's always a person and process.
Yeah, I mean, our AI solutions for our cyber products would still benefit from having human interaction at a key point in the process, and we identify that, and it's case by case. There isn't really a generic answer, but definitely machine learning and AI are going to help in that challenge. But in the way that Simon says, you can only get so far, and then you have to start looking at traditional fallbacks.
It's felt as if cybersecurity has been big in the news over the last few years, possibly because more people are working from home, possibly because it's just a welcome break to hear about a cyber attack now. Was the industry caught a bit unaware? Because either attacks are becoming more public now, or there seems to be far more of them happening. Were we just caught sleeping?
Oh, I think it's ramped up. I mean, I think that the malactors have become smarter and smarter in the way in which they, can profit from this. This has become a big industry. Obviously, digital currency has created a mechanism for them to actually get the rewards in a way in which it makes sense for them to do it without having to physically pick up a brown envelope, for example, like in the old days, if you know what I mean. But we've got to a point where organisations are getting impacted, and because I think GDPR and other regulatory policies that have come in around personal data and personal information, it has forced organisations to have to tell now when they have been breached and records have been taken. You know, I'm sure Microsoft didn't relish last week advising that 500,000 people's passwords have been leaked from their Azure accounts. You know, they didn't want to do that, but they felt a necessary requirement to do it, because then those individuals can go and change their passwords, and we can start to get ahead of again, the fight, I suppose, against the malactors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the challenge for the platform providers, to have that balance exactly in their minds. You know, they're there to sell services to help the economy move forward, great, and with that comes some risk. So you've got to make that trade-off. Are we going to lose market share because we're not going to reveal this risk that really we should have managed? And that's really the place for the platform providers to step up and demonstrate that they're in that for the greater good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think they're just unfortunate. I mean, everyone's a likely candidate. Trust me. There's as you know, if you look at your own personal email accounts, you'll see multiple different types of attacks and people trying to get into you, and it's the same for everyone everywhere. And it's just going on because it's a big business, And as I talked about in my session around industrial cybersecurity, locking down someone's personal data or stealing, a manufacturer or whatever's IP around their car designs and whatever it may be, there's some money in that, but there's the impact of personal information and the regulatory fines that now get impacted on organisations, and there's multiple regulatory bodies, but there's also the criticality from an industrial point of view that you can't produce oil, gas, whatever it may be, cars, food, whatever. That's that becomes really critical from a revenue point of view and reputational damage.
Yeah. We see a lot more attacks on infrastructure. It certainly feels as if we do. And infrastructure could obviously be an oil pipeline, as you referenced in your talk earlier, but it could also be a hospital or a primary school. Or are you finding that these places are just easier targets because they're slightly further behind, or are they more likely to pay the ransom, or what is it that let's say hypothetically I'm a hacker. That's probably not a phrase you use now, but let's say I'm a hacker, and I have to have a particular mindset to do that, but I have to have a particular mindset to attack a hospital. So why are they still on the menu when there's presumably targets that's going to get you in far less trouble if you get caught?
I mean, I would say they would gravitate to where the biggest reward is. And in most cases, I'd say where they can get the most money for whatever ransomware. If we're talking about malactors and sponsored malactors or nation states, they're either going to go for what would disable my adversary from a nation state point of view, to a sponsored sort of malactor is how do I get the most amount of money, to then the others which are just unfortunate because somebody's been able to pay the hacker or the malactor that's designed the code that effectively has put it onto the dark web, that somebody's then bought and used as a phishing activity to then try and profit from whoever's that, unlike anyone could be a candidate in those circumstances. It almost breaks down that level, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. The motivation is going to be different, and the state actor level is a very different piece. The idea of breaking trust in, say, government services because they were known to be hacked, that's just not a place we'd want to be, is it? So, the thought there is not about profit and taking your bitcoins out of it's something rather different. So you have to really understand the psychology behind it.
You mentioned the different types of attacker. So is it a nation state? Is it a rogue group? From my understanding, there are communities now of I'm going to keep using the word hacker, I'm sure there's a better phrase. There are communities now, and there are really well-organized organizations. So, I was listening to an interview the other day, and they were interviewing someone who used to be a hacker, used to run a ransomware operation, and they had affiliates, and affiliates would use their software and they'd go and attack places, and the affiliates would get paid if their attack was successful, and they'd get a percentage of the commission. So with all of this in mind, and presumably there's some back end there that's been made, and these affiliates are essentially borrowing it, is it even possible to know who's attacking you when you're under attack? And if it is it helpful to know who's attacking you?
Yes, but I think what you're referring to is there's actually a malactivist. So there's now communities that are just anti-system, and whether that's because of the political agendas or whatever it may be, that they're being politicized in some form from society, that they want to look at it in a way where, okay, how do we team together to sort of break the system or break a system, whatever it may be, and they collaborate in that way. But it also could be just that they want to, be better than or show that they're better than other people in some form in terms of, finding vulnerabilities. There's a whole multitude of reasons for some of those things, and I don't have a better answer than that, Richard.
I would say yes, it does help. It does help to know who is out to get you, and then whether or not that means that you do something different directly or you're more likely to respond in a different way later. It's being prepared. I mean, the whole issue, we said earlier, secure by design, have a think about, the psychology of what it is that's going to hurt the customer you're helping. So, if it's reputational damage, if it's availability, if it's a critical national industry that you're supporting and there's an infrastructure dependency there that you've got to ensure is working, then it's obvious that there's going to be a different mindset that you've got to defend against, and so you have that in from the outset.
And I would just add, actually, now after you've said that, Richard, you've prompted something. I think, threat intelligence is now becoming more sophisticated. So we talk about the future and way in which we're looking from multiple angles of the dark web in terms of, taking those packet inspections, turning that into actionable intelligence. There's organizations that are being born that does that now, that creates that outside in, am I a likely target just because I'm X corporation, and that now allows and means that at the board level and at the CISO level, they can get actionable intelligence, say, okay, is chatter within the dark web from these organizations which are scraping those packets and inspecting them. That means that actually I might be the next likely target, and then from where? And then they can start to put some of those policies in, do some red team, blue team, or other exercises to prepare for where they may be attacked. So yeah, there's a mixture of that, understanding who and where, but there's more intelligence being born out of some of that as well.
That's right, yeah.
So this panel is on the future of cybersecurity, and it's a topic that I've skirted around because, as I mentioned in the introduction, if you knew what the future was, then there'd be no need for the industry, right? Because the problem would be solved. The problem's never going to be solved. What if I were a chief information security officer at a large organization? We already know what's keeping me awake at night now. Is that likely to be a different problem in 5 years' time? Are there going to be other issues keeping me awake?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I look at what is happening at the moment, you've got cybersecurity mesh, which is effectively because microservices, which is a way in which you develop and structure an application, and they're loosely connected from multiple different services. There's way in where malactors can create service impersonations, which means that they can extract data as a piece of code rather than actually as an individual or attack. I think vendor consolidation around their IT controls is another activity which is going on. And at the same time, this is all being raised at the board level from a criticality point of view, which means that, as they think about it, okay, I need to trust no one, and that sort of zero trust goes back to that model and identity access. But at the same time, how do I then stay ahead of what's coming? And really, you've got this big disrupt around the corner, which is quantum computing, and the ability to identify the private key from public key information using quantum computing power means that we need to figure out how do we move to a quantum encryption type model to protect all of the communications in a way which can't be disrupted. And that's, that is within that 5-year window. Yeah. And I think that's probably something, how do I evolve my architecture now, protecting myself and zero trust and, servicing the board at the same time protecting for what somebody might have as a capability in the future. I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely, and don't forget there's the policy constraints, GDPR, as you mentioned. There are things that force organisations to keep sharp on these sorts of issues, and rightly so. And so all of those dynamics interplay the whole time, and I think that is the future. It's the present today. It's keeping that balance and looking at the different driving forces and making a sensible ultimately risk-based decision about what it is that you're going to focus on. Maybe it'll keep you awake at night, but ideally you'll focus on it in a positive way, and you'll then change that focus as new drivers appear, market changes, technology provides new opportunities or threats, all of those factors, and it needs the board to understand how it's going to affect what they're in charge of and what they're accountable for, and then that flows down the organisation so that the organisation's fully prepared.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on a really good point, which is the risk prioritisation. I think you're going to start to see this. We have to live with a compromise, because you're going to have to focus your capabilities and efforts around the things that you really need to protect, and that's going to lead to a fact where you've got to let some of that compromises drop, just because you can't cover everything. And we're seeing in some form evolve from the US around the executive order that President Biden is driving around critical infrastructure, security, and ultimately what that means around sharing threat intel and making sure that they're protecting the critical functions of the US. I think we'll see the same way which GDPR drove personal data obligations and regulations in other industries and other countries. We'll see the same thing happen from what the US executive order is driving in other regions and countries.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we're out of time. Simon, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.